You know, it's not often that out of nowhere I get random inspiration to just make an entire what if movie just because I just felt like it. But today's one of those days, and I don't even feel like making an intro. I'm just gonna record this video and just drop it however it is. Matter of fact, I'm probably not even gonna get like a really cool thumbnail made for it just because I want to make this video and a part of me feels like it's not going to get many views, but I don't care. I just want to make this video so unbelievably badly. That said, I do have to tell you guys really quickly, I am not scripting this video at all. I did have a subscriber actually like make like a little mini script for me, but I actually thought of another really awesome way that this story could go for like the first minute of it. But yeah, other than that, I have nothing else thought. Okay, so for this specific video, I just quickly want to preface Deku's gonna be a villain just because I feel like I do a lot of hero what ifs, and I feel like making him a villain and making a whole different plot thread and focusing on different events except for the ones that we normally get in My Hero would probably be a lot cooler for me in my opinion. Oh, and for those of you guys that don't know who Lucci is, he's basically just a character from One Piece that was a one-off villain a long time ago. A really cool character. He gave Luffy a huge run for his money. This character and his side supporting cast ended up introducing some crazy powers such as Iron Body, which essentially allows a person to become so hard that if you hit them, you literally hurt your own hand. Paper Art, which essentially makes you as bendable as a paper. You know how paper in the wind, it just starts like bending and crazy and stuff like that. That's what that does. It's kind of like Ultra Instinct similar, but it doesn't exactly make you dodge instantly. Then there's an ability called Shave, which is essentially kind of like a body flicker from Naruto, if I had to say it, or like a flash step from Bleach. Then we got Tempest Kick, which is essentially just an air slash where the person kicks. You got an ability such as Shigan, which is essentially a finger bullet. It's pretty simple in the concept. And then Moonwalk, an ability that allows you to kick the air so hard you're literally able to jump into the air. You're basically able to fly by kicking very hard. So pretty much what Mike Guy did in the last battle in the war arc. That said, this character is also going to be having a devil fruit ability, but I'm not sure if I want to give him a devil fruit ability or if I want it to be a quirk. I'm still thinking about that, so we're gonna leave that on pause. But for now, I just want to start off the story with a quirkless Izuku. Oh, one more change I also want to implement to the story. All UA is not going to be a high school, it's going to be a college, just because there's absolutely no way that Deku's going to be learning the Rokushiki martial arts style by the time that he's 14. It's just not possible. By the time he's 18, all of a sudden we have a pretty good conversation. That said, let's begin. Okay, so not much is really going to be changing for Deku in terms of his childhood, in the sense that he's going to be told he's quirkless, and everyone is essentially going to count him out from, well, just life in general. Everyone is going to count him out. Nobody's going to believe in him. Bakugo is going to bully him for being quirkless. His mom is going to be like, "I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different," which is just not what Deku needed to hear in that moment. And then everybody else in the world essentially is counting him out and saying he's weak. Now, the original Deku in this timeline would have, or no, not this timeline, but the original My Hero story would have 100% gave up and essentially decided that if everybody else doesn't believe in him, well then why should he? But in this specific timeline of events, I'm going to be changing things drastically. Because this version of, I was about to say Naruto, but no. This version of Deku isn't just going to lie down and take it. You know what I mean? He's going to fight for his dream. And that's the story we're going to be covering today. So I believe that this is all going to start off with the young Izuku vowing to train. I can see him essentially doing the most that he possibly could for his age. Obviously, while other kids were working on using their quirks at home, blasting off explosions, extending their fingernails, yanking their eyes out of their head, shooting water from their hands, and etc., Deku was at home pretty much with nothing but his own body. So from a young age, Deku decided that that's all he had to contend with. Izuku wasn't gonna be content deciding that, hey, I'm quirkless, so let me just give up on my goal. He wanted to get up and do something about it. And so, Izuku decided to use the only thing that he had. If he was going to be quirkless, well then he was just gonna have to be the only quirkless hero there will ever be. He's gonna have to show everybody that they're wrong about him, that he can be a hero, and that he's not as weak as everyone thinks just because he's quirkless. So, every day, Deku would work out, he would run, focus on his stamina, and being a little kid, as much as this would feel like grueling training, like training straight out of hell itself, the interesting thing is that Izuku was doing borderline average training for a normal adult, going on runs, doing push-ups, sit-ups, and essentially a bit of calisthenics. And what's interesting is this would definitely harden Deku's body. He would get a little bit of muscle mass on himself, and he would be very physically fit for a kid of his age, but that just wasn't gonna cut it. Izuku needed more. He's not contending with everyday robberies. He's contended with superpowered beings who have the abilities of growing massive. People who are out there using quirk drugs to enhance themselves. Izuku's gonna be putting his life on the line every single time that he wants to stop a mugging from happening. Because creeps out there who have these insane abilities like blade quirks or fire quirks or lightning quirks or hardening quirks. Izuku needs a way to contend, and while he's training, this would certainly give Izuku a new level of confidence that he never honestly thought he would ever have. But with this, Izuku would get a bit of a pep in his step as the months would go by, and Bakugo would notice that. He'd be the first one to take note, and he would not like this. Seeing Izuku happy for some reason, regardless of the fact that he was quirkless, just rubbed Bakugo the wrong way, because in his mind, Izuku should be miserable. He should be feeling terrible and feeling like there's nothing left for him but to be an extra, but instead Izuku wasn't giving out hope, and Bakugo wanted to make sure that Izuku had every last semblance of hope smashed out of him. So on this particular day, Izuku would end up getting picked on by Bakugo a lot harsher than any other day. He would push him around, shooting explosions at him, telling him, "What you got a smile on your face for, Deku? Don't you remember you're quirkless? You're not gonna be anybody or do anything, so I don't know why you're walking around so happy." What's there to be happy about, right guys? His friends would turn to Bakugo saying, "Yeah, you're just a quirkless loser. What are you so happy for?" Deku would stand up saying, "I'm happy because I'm still gonna be a hero. Quirkless or not, I'm gonna be the first hero that ever doesn't have a quirk. Even if I don't amount to much, even if I can save 100 people, then my life would have meant something." Bakugo hearing that would get pissed, knowing that Deku had no intentions of standing down, and Deku holding both of his hands out in front of him would piss Bakugo off. Bakugo, being a child and not having perfect control over his quirk, would proceed to send a full-fledged explosion towards the direction of Izuku that would actually go on to leave him a burn mark on his no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to ruin Deku's face. So let's say no burn mark, but it definitely does give Izuku a big burn on his face that essentially leads Deku straight to the ground, tumbling down, and wouldn't you know it, the teacher would walk in to see Bakugo doing this. That said, the students would pretty much all vouch for Bakugo, saying that Izuku had started it and that he was trying to pick a fight with Bakugo, who was only defending himself. All thanks to Bakugo being more popular than Izuku and people being afraid of Bakugo since he had a tendency of being a bit of a bully. That said, Deku would actually end up getting expelled from that school, and after this would take place, Deku would go home to an extremely quiet car ride. I don't know if you guys have ever had this happen to you personally, but have you guys ever been in a situation where you literally did nothing wrong, but like your parents are just convinced that you did, and what are you supposed to do? Like say, "No, I didn't"? That's the situation that Izuku finds himself in, and no matter what he says, Mama Inko, well, she just wasn't listening. That said, Izuku would make his way home and through tears would finally end up getting up as he would decide that no, that's not it. That's not where his story ends, right? So Izuku would tell Mama Inko that he's going out for a run, and she would say, "Wait, Izuku, But Izuku would simply just walk out the door and run off, tears going down his eyes as Inko would think, "Izuku, come." But that would actually be the last time that she'll ever see Izuku, because in that moment Izuku might not have known it, but he would run away from home. Izuku, as he would run, he would simply be laughing, going, ah ha ha ha, I am here, thinking of All Might and how All Might would never get up, no matter how hopeless the situation seems. As Izuku's walking down this alleyway, he eventually ends up, running and running and running until eventually Izuku would actually make a wrong turn. And not exactly knowing how to get back home, Izuku would actually end up running down an alleyway thinking it to be a shortcut. As Izuku goes down, he would realize that he was sorely mistaken, as he would turn to see that there was actually a girl who was currently being put into a van, and Izuku, seeing this, would take a couple of steps back, covering his mouth in fear. Izuku would turn to see a bunch of big looking thugs with weird quirks and a bunch of mutation type quirks. Izuku, seeing this, would be like, what are you guys but he would just stay silent. Suddenly one of them would say, hey, look at the brat. Looks like we got lucky. We're gonna have another kid to take to the boss. It'd be at this point that Izuku would look up to this young girl who must have been like 16 or 15. And Izuku, looking up with nothing but fear in his eyes, would watch as a large hand would come closer and closer. Izuku closing his eyes, but it would never make contact. Out of nowhere, Izuku would see that all of those men were on the ground completely dead. Or so it seemed, but yeah, no, they were dead. Anyways, Izuku would look up to see a really old man who was already using a cane, and Izuku, looking at him, would say, Mister, was that you? My bad, y'all. Anyways, the man would turn towards him and nod as Izuku would ask him how in the world he did that. He's so old and yet he managed to take down those guys that look so strong. The man looked at him and laughed, saying, these guys, strong? Kid, you're crazy if you think people like this are strong. In this day and age, these guys are just bozos. Strong are people like me back in the day. Those are real strong people. Izuku, hearing that, would think to himself, well, how did you do that? He would ask him, and the man would simply say, I simply use martial arts. And Izuku would say, what do you mean martial arts? Don't you have a quirk? You must have used a quirk, right? Maybe it was a quirk that allowed you to knock them out without touching them. Or maybe you used a projectile quirk, a wind quirk maybe? Something like that. I did feel a breeze, Izuku would say, as the man would simply look at him and laugh as he would put his hand over his head, turning to the girl and simply nodding to her with his head to essentially leave. The girl with the blind, like essentially with a gag in her mouth and her hands being tied up, would walk by the old man, who we're going to be giving him the name Suriko, all thanks to Apollo and Omni Ego, who helped out with a bit of the inspiration for this next section of the story. I did take your guys' idea just for the little training section, so thank you guys so much for putting in the time for that. But that being said, yeah, Izuku would essentially ask the old man, so what did you use? And the old man would explain that what he actually ended up using was a martial arts style called Rokushiki, a forgotten martial arts style that most people couldn't master and most people couldn't hope to even begin learning. From here, Izuku would widen his eyes like a, he is a child, which is why I was about to say like a stargaze child, or what would be the better expression to use? Like a kid who was just shocked, like he's just like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like that look that all of us have had at one point in our lives of just like wondering and being awed and stuff. That being said, Izuku, doing this, the man would look at him and just feel like he's known this kid his whole life. From this moment, Izuku would say, do you think I could learn that? If I was to learn that, could I become a hero? The man would look at Izuku and say, if you were to learn this, you'd become more than just a hero. Top 10 at least. I never wanted to become a hero. It was just too much of a hassle. I use my skills for other things. For the government, I guess you could say. Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself, wow, this man must have been extremely important. As Izuku would say, Can you train me? His eyes closed, holding his hands out, as the man would look at him and say, I could train you, kid, but I just need you to know it's gonna be like going to hell and back. If you even make it back, that is. That said, Izuku would be like, huh? And next thing you know, Deku would be getting grabbed by a shirt collar as the man would drag Deku with him, and Izuku would be like, wait, but I need to tell my mom. He would say, forget about her. From this moment forth, you're my student. So go ahead and forget about your mom over there, because it's going to be a long time until you see her. Izuku would say, wait, she's going to be worried sick. She's... As the man would simply turn towards him and say, I'm going to give you everything you've ever dreamed of, but it's going to require sacrifice. Can you do that? Izuku, looking at him and looking towards the building that he knows his mom's inside of, would simply nod, as he would think back to the fact that she didn't believe in him, Bakugo didn't believe in him, the teacher sure as hell didn't believe in him. So Izuku just kind of nods his head and thinks, I'm gonna make sure everybody knows that they're wrong about me. So Izuku would end up getting in the car with an old man, as from this moment forth he would say, you could address me as Suriko, or just Gramps. Whatever you want. At the end of the day, I'm going to be your master, so you could also just call me that. Izuku at this moment would nod and say, Suriko's fine. Where are we going? As Izuku at this moment would just kind of be told to shut up, as Suriko would drive them extremely far. They arrive at a mountain which has a huge dojo in it, and Izuku would look around to see a beautiful sight overlooking a massive section of nothing but forest. They must have been at least 19 hours away from where Deku was at. He passed out, and when he woke up it was nighttime, and they arrived at some weird looking dojo. That said, Suriko would laugh, making a joke, telling him to unpack his things. And Izuku at this point would kind of just be like, but I don't... As Suriko would say, kid, take a joke, slapping him on his back, as Izuku would smile and be like, oh, right. From this point, Suriko would make his way towards the closet, as he would throw Deku a gi and tell Izuku that his training starts now. From this point, he would grab a little ruler, and he would smack Deku in the hand, as he would tell him, get into your training stance. From this point, Deku would get into a really weak looking training stance, the same one that he would have used to try to stand up to Bakugo in the first episode of My Hero. And the second that he sees that, Suriko would pretty much just facepalm, as he'd be like, I've got a lot of work to do. From this point, Suriko would proceed to help fix his fighting stance, and the second that this would happen, he would pretty much end up telling Izuku that for the next hour, his entire goal is to get out and get back into that fighting stance. And so, every time that Deku would do it wrong, Suriko would pretty much end up smacking him with that ruler. Izuku would have cried, but Suriko would simply yell at Deku, telling him, you want to be a hero? Then this is what comes with it. Everybody else has the luck of having a quirk, but you've got to work 100 times harder than they do if you want to even get a chance to learn the Rokushiki techniques. Izuku, through muffled tears, would simply say, yeah, as he would get into the fighting stance again, until muscle memory was broken into him through pretty much fear. It wasn't as much the repetition, but just the fear of being smacked again by that dang ruler. That said, Suriko, I think, yeah, that's his name, Suriko would turn towards Deku and say, well, now that you've got that down, now I need you to stay in that stance and punch 100 times with each arm. From this point, Deku would be like, training's not done? As Suriko would say, you kidding, kid? 1,000 punches and 1,000 kicks each leg. Get a move on. He would smack Deku as he would say, right, and he would begin punching the air again and 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 again. And at the end of it, he would do 500 punches on each arm, saying, I'm done. Suddenly, Suriko would look at him and say, kid, you're halfway done. I said 1,000 punches. So far, you've only done 500. 1,000 in each arm. 1,000 in each arm. And Izuku would be like, huh? As covered and drenched in sweat, Deku would throw more punches and more punches and more punches, but Deku would essentially just faint from exhaustion. As Suriko, walking over towards this young Izuku, would pick him up and throw him into a cold bathtub, where Deku would immediately be waken up from the cold water, as Suriko would laugh, telling him, wash up and then go to bed. Tomorrow's training is going to be double that for not completing it today. And Deku, hearing that, would almost faint from the fear. That said, Deku would wash up in a couple of minutes, and he would lay down in his bed that he would actually have on the ground. Kind of interesting, because it's Todoroki style the way that he's going to be living for the next couple of years. Mind you, Deku at this point is 5 or 6 years old, and he's going to be living with this old man until he's 18 years old. So for the following a bunch of years of Deku's life, he's going to be with him. Oh, as for Inko, she definitely would have ended up putting out some missing child posters and things of that nature, but after not finding him for a long time, she would assume the worst, and she would not exactly, handle this very well. She would go through a long period where she would fall into depression and feel horrible about her last encounter with her son, but ultimately, with Inko being a single mom, I'm gonna say, she would eventually end up finding new love once more, having another child, and she would have a daughter whose name would actually be Mitsuri. That said, we're not really going to care about Inko for the rest of the story, so I figured I'd just fill you in on that because, kind of a realistic thing to have happen. Anyways, what happens after this is that Deku would essentially go through a training every single day for the next couple of years. And this is just to get Deku to learn the basics to get started on Rokushiki. That said, the next day the same thing would happen. Deku would throw 1,000 punches in each arm, and after having done so, Deku would fall to the ground as he'd be gasping for air, going, I'm done. He would look up at Suriko, and Suriko would say, all right, then get up. Now, you gotta do 1,000 kicks in each leg. And Deku, hearing that, would just pass out from literal fear. He would throw a cold bucket of water on Izuku, and Izuku would be like, why? He'd wake up scared. His arms are practically at his side numb, as he would say, I tell you to do 100 push-ups, but your arms are like spaghetti noodles. So, 1,000 kicks, each leg. Giddy up, kid. Izuku would do about 200 in each leg, 200 and something in each leg, until he would fully pass out from full, exhaustion. Suriko would walk by Izuku, and he would actually smile as he would think the kid actually has a lot more a lot more spunk than I thought. He did about 200 more kicks than I thought he could manage, and that was all off willpower alone. Maybe he could even learn that technique. That said, Deku after this point would essentially end up waking up the next day, never would have even having showered since he was absolutely exhausted, and Suriko would have actually headed off to go get Deku something that he was going to need for his training. That said, Deku would get up and perform his usual 1,000 air punches, as Suriko would smile, telling him, good job, kid. I didn't even have to tell you this time. As he would then go on to give Deku a weighted vest, and Deku would say, what's this? At this point, Suriko would drop it on the ground, and it would be revealed that this vest would actually have a grand total of 100 pounds on it, as Suriko would tell him that this vest is going to be working to strengthen his bones and muscles. As Deku putting it on would struggle just to do that, as he would then feel like he's off balance because it was just so much more weight than he was used to. At this point now, Deku weighs a grand total of like 200 something pounds, considering that, or no, because he's like 6, so he probably only weighs like 90 something, so he's like 190 something, like I don't know how much a kid weighs, all right, but the point is he weighs whatever he weighs plus 100, all right. So Deku, after this would happen, would continue doing the punches, the kicks, the punches, the kicks, and as every single day would pass, the training would feel more and more and more grueling. But after a week would finally pass, Suriko would turn towards Deku and tell him to take the vest off. Deku, after doing this, would proceed to do his usual training this time, and he would feel that it was so unbelievably easy. The punches were coming out so incredibly fast that Suriko was thinking, this kid, he's a prodigy. And Deku would then proceed to do his kicks, and he would actually feel like he has so much energy, so much stamina, that felt like a breeze. And from here, Suriko would smile, telling him, all right, kid, now it's 300 squats and 50 laps around the mountain. Deku, after hearing that, all his happiness would turn to a straight up look of just despair, and Deku would proceed to do the 300 squats, as his legs would definitely start feeling the fatigue, as he would then go on to do about 3 laps around the mountain before passing out from exhaustion. Suriko would see him, and he would end up dumping another bucket of water on him, as Izuku would wake up and say, it's cold. And honestly, I think it's hilarious because obviously we know that Lucci has a power that allows him to turn into the cat fruit, which is really just a leopard, and we all know that cats hate water, so I think it's kind of like a really funny foreshadowing of the ability that Deku's gonna get. Also, yeah, I've decided it's 100% gonna be a quirk, but how does he get the quirk? Stick around to the end of the video to find out. But yeah, no, cringy Xehther aside, eventually time would pass and the training would just get easier and easier for Deku. 300 squats turns to 600, 600 turns to 1200, 50 laps turns to 100, and so forth and so forth. You get the picture. More punches would be thrown in, more sit-ups would be thrown in, a bunch of push-ups would be thrown in, pull-ups would be thrown in, and Deku would have weighted vests given to him which eventually exceed even 1,000 pounds. Deku would even be given wrist weights that have like 100 pounds on each arm, and the training would just be getting more and more and more insane. By the time that Deku was 12, Deku was already so unbelievably good at this training that most days he could even finish early and play video games, which was a gift that Suriko would have gotten him for his 9th birthday. No, wait, 10th. No, 9th. Yeah, 9th birthday. That said, time would pass, and like I said, Izuku would essentially get to a point where his status as a human could definitely be called superhuman, with Izuku growing to an age where now he's 12 and his body was not exactly fully done growing, obviously because he's 12, but in terms of the bone density, the strength that he has behind his muscles, the speed that Deku has, Deku was easily like gonna beat somebody like Stain at just the age of 12 years old. So Suriko would pretty much think that Deku's finally ready to actually learn Rokushiki training. And so as Izuku would be inside of his room playing video games, taking things easy, Suriko would walk inside and essentially end up telling Izuku that today's a momentous occasion, walking in with a bottle of sake, as Izuku seeing this would question, "Why do you have that?" And Suriko would pretty much end up telling they're celebrating because he thinks that he's finally ready to begin their training. Deku, after hearing that, would turn to him and say, "Haven't we been training this whole time? I'm already fast and incredibly strong. I could leap into the sky practically." Suriko would say, "Kid, you haven't even begun your training. If you thought what you've been doing this whole time was hard, well then get ready to experience the same fatigue that you felt when you first came in here. If you thought that training was hell, well, get ready for this." Suriko would smile creepily as Izuku would feel so much fear in his heart in this moment, and Suriko would essentially end up telling Deku to take a drink. Izuku at this moment would do it, and he would begin gagging as he would be like, "Come on now, I didn't want to do that." And Suriko would slap him on the back saying, "Come on now, kid." Deku would think, how the hell is this old man so strong? The dude's like 90 years old and he's still able to hit me around like a rag doll. From this point, Deku would make his way outside, and Suriko would have a training dummy set up outside as he would go on to essentially show off all 6 of the Rokushiki techniques, starting off by using shave, which is essentially just like a flash step or a body flicker, which essentially made him move so unbelievably fast that Deku would be stunned, not even able to track him, with him saying, "Gramps, you've been able to move this fast this whole time?" As he would say, "Sure I have. I haven't ever used Rokushiki when we've sparred." And Izuku seeing this would be like, he's a monster. As at this point, he would then proceed to tell Izuku to hit him square in the face as hard as he can. And Izuku would say, "What? I'm not gonna do that. You're insane. I'm not gonna hit you in the face. What if I kill you, you old man? You're already senile." He would begin laughing like crazy, saying, "As if you ever could." As he would say, "Now do it." As Izuku would wind his fist back and punch straight at his face. But what Izuku would be stunned by is the fact that even his hardened knuckles, which were extremely hardened from punching a bunch of wood and steel and then moving on to essentially punching a gigantic tree every single day. But in this moment, Deku would feel pain, something that he has not done in a while since he had begun his training with this old man. At this point, he'd be stunned by how hard his body was, as he would say, "Kid, the first technique was called shave, an ability that essentially allows me to look like I'm teleporting by essentially stepping 10 times in a row, or like stomping 10 times so fast that I'm able to move instantaneously." Then he would go on to turn towards Izuku and say the second technique is called Iron Body, or it has like another name, but it's like the Japanese one. I don't feel like using it. It essentially allows me to harden my body. He would turn towards Izuku and say, "Try to hit me." This time he would dodge, moving in a way that Izuku had never seen him do so before, as he would say, "The third is called Paper Art." At this point, he would tell Izuku to step back, as he would say, Tempest Kick, throwing a kick that would proceed to slash 7 trees in half, causing them to fall down onto the ground, and Izuku watching this would be absolutely mesmerized, as from this point, he would then turn towards one of the training dummies that Deku would use, made out of complete steel, as he would shoot a Shigan, which is essentially just a finger bullet with air propulsion by like flicking his finger extremely hard. It causes like air to shoot towards it, and this would proceed to actually penetrate through it, as Izuku watching this would be absolutely stunned, and he would finally say, and finally, moonwalk. He'd begin floating in the air, practically kicking off of air itself, practically double jumping, which is what this ability essentially allows you to do, changing directions in air by kicking off of the ground. Just think of what Might Guy did. But that said, Deku seeing all of this would be absolutely shocked by the fact that this is something that he's going to be able to do. Not something he wants to do, but something he's going to. Suriko at this moment would turn towards him and tell him that mastering all of these is something that's practically impossible. But if Deku could learn even 2 of these arts, Deku will 100% be able to go out into the field and become an incredible pro hero one day. Deku hearing this would say that he doesn't plan to just learn 2, but to not leave this place until he's mastered each and every single one. Now mind you, Deku's now 12, and it would take him around a year to master each technique, with some taking longer, some taking shorter amount of time, and Izuku working on pretty much his own versions of these things. So he would learn Iron Body, Paper Art, Shave, Tempest Kick, Shigan, and Moonwalk, which are all extremely busted abilities. In case you guys want a better explanation of how these abilities work, I'll have a video linked down below called Roku Shiki Explained or something like that. You guys can watch that. It's like a 6-minute video, so you know, if you guys go watch that, let them know I sent you. It was a great help of me when making this video, since I'd completely forgotten how CP0 actually fought, because I didn't plan this what if at all. I kind of just like was sitting in bed and I was just like, I just want to make this video so bad. You know, I decided I would. And the only thing that was stopping me originally was just the fact that for the life of me, I couldn't find a single good Rob Lucci PNG. Sure, there is Rob Lucci images that I could use for a thumbnail, but they're just not good enough to be put on a thumbnail. So instead I decided I'd just make whatever and just call it a day. Honestly, who cares? I just want to make this video, and I'm sure that for all 30 of you guys that actually tuned in to watch this, you guys are going to love this video regardless, because you're here for the story, not for the thumbnail, not for the intro, definitely not for me. Anyways, that said, continuing forward with the story, after Deku would learn all 6 of styles of the Roku Shiki technique, Deku would pretty much be ready to go out into the real world. He had said that he wasn't leaving until he mastered it, and now that he did, he was ready. He was ready to go out there and show everybody that they were wrong, and ready to go see his mom again. And so, after mastering all his techniques and working on them once more, and you know, doing his thing, Deku would go out and pretty much see old man Suriko sitting outside in a lawn chair, as Deku would thank him for all that he's done for him, thanking him for the training, thanking him for every meal, for every time that he smacked that ruler on his hand. He would start shivering just from thinking of it. He would thank him for every water bucket that he had gave him, and every single time that he had taken care of him when he had broke a bone, or when he had, you know, pretty much had stomach aches and things of that sort. He would tell him that he was a tough guy, but at the end of the day, he wouldn't have had it any other way. And Suriko would look at him and say, don't get all sappy on me, boy. Go out there and become the hero that I know you've always had the ability to be. I'm done training you, and I'm done being a master. You want to teach these techniques to the next generation? Go ahead, kid, but for your sake, I just want to let you know it wasn't exactly easy training you, you lost cause. From this point, Izuku would smile at him and say, I won't let you down. From this point, Suriko would say, get out of here, come on, I've spent way too much time with you. It's about high time I invited some ladies over. And Izuku would laugh, saying, never change, old man. From here, Izuku would essentially proceed to leave using Moonwalk, as he would jump into the air and Suriko would just watch as the kid was off. He takes a sip and he would smile, thinking to himself that that boy might have just saved his life. At the point that he had met Izuku, he thought that there was nothing left for him to do. Nobody really wanted him, and he didn't really think that he was needed in this world, but that boy gave him a purpose. He was like a son to him, a grandson that is, but a son nonetheless, and he'll never forget every memory that he made with him. At that point, the old man would proceed essentially just kick back and relax as he would think to himself, I'd forgotten what it was like to live alone up here. Kinda nice for a change. As he would then get back up and decide, time to go back to the city. He would make his way back, and you'd pretty much just see this man doing some things that I'm not able to mention on YouTube. That's just the kind of man that Suriko is. Take it, take it or leave it. Anyways, that said, as Izuku would make his way back into town, Izuku would spot a really cool looking coffee shop as he would make his way inside and stare at all the drink options that they had available. It was a really cool looking one too. It looked super, techy, and all the drinks looked delicious. The pictures up above, they were mouth-watering, and it had looked so much different from the last time that he was here. After all, he hadn't seen it in like dang near 18 years. Not really, but like 10 or 12 years at least, right? Well, okay, let's say he was 6 when he left, so 12 years. He hasn't seen stuff like this for 12 years, for crying out loud. Obviously, he's played games and seen movies, but that was about it, right? It's not like he even had that much free time. That said, Deku would stand in line, and unfortunately for him, he didn't have any money, so he'd make his way up front and pretty much just ask for a cup of water. Once he made it up to the front, the girl who would actually be attending him would start blushing like crazy. Her face would go completely red as she would stare at Izuku and go, are you sure that's all you want? She begins playing with her hair as she would turn towards Izuku, and Izuku, looking at her, would question, what the heck is going on with her? As she would say, hey, here, how about you try this one? It's on the house, free of charge. As Izuku would take it, and he would actually think, wow, really? That's actually the one I wanted. From here, Izuku would proceed to take this drink and just sit down as he would proceed to just watch the TV up, seeing the local news and stuff like that. He's sipping the drink. Izuku's having the time of his life sipping on this boba drink or whatever. And as this happens, you pretty much just hear an explosion go off outside as there was a random villain attack, and this guy was trying to rob a store, but he ended up getting cornered, and now he's using his fire quirk on all the heroes that are around. Unfortunately, not many good ones, because they were getting beat up left and right. This villain had already dropped 4 heroes and he had just gotten started. And Deku, seeing this with his goal of becoming a hero one day, would immediately get up as he would pretty much use his shave technique to essentially speed blitz right in front of this man. You would see the door go wide open, the little bell would ring, the drink would be, on the table, and Izuku would stand in front of this man as he would proceed to just land a devastating punch to the gut, which would send him crashing into a building and knock him completely unconscious. After this would happen, Deku would proceed to just walk off with his hands in his pockets as he would think to himself, did I really get that strong? Nonetheless though, Deku would realize one thing. He is going to be needing money, or at least some way to sustain himself, at least until the UA training, or at least until UA High would begin in a couple of months. Plus, how's he going to afford to pay for that? He hadn't even begun thinking about that, and so Izuku would actually make his way back down towards that coffee shop, as remembering how nice she was to him, Izuku would ask, are you guys hiring? And the girl would actually look at Izuku and say, yeah, of course we're hiring. She would go over towards the manager. Luckily for him, the manager was also a girl. And she would say, yeah, of course we're hiring. Deku, looking like a handsome young stud. She would think that he's going to draw a lot of attention from female customers. So she would give him a job with a very generous rate for starting pay. And Izuku would accept it very easily. After this would happen, Izuku would think, great, this is only a couple of minutes away from mom's house. As he would end up making his way towards that direction, as Deku was getting closer and closer, he has his little suit on or whatever. He has a white suit on at this moment, right? Not the black one that Lucci has when he's like a villain, but like the white one. And as Izuku gets closer, he could see a girl with green hair that looks just like his mother, as well as a different man. Deku, seeing this, would see that Inko looked so happy, and Izuku would wonder if it's even for the best to even go try to talk to her. I mean, he hasn't seen her in years, and the only reason that he left was to prove her wrong. So did he even really want to see her? Did she want to see him? Deku would have so many questions going through his mind, but ultimately he would decide that screw it, he's gonna go talk to her. Izuku, making his way towards Inko, would look at her and he would say, hey, how you doing? Inko, looking at Izuku, would say, oh, hi. As Izuku would say, so, how have things been, Inko? As she would say, do I know you? As Izuku would like look at her and with a shocked look on his face would think, what? She doesn't. As he would say, oh, no, sorry, I thought you were somebody else, my mistake. He would rub the back of his head and he would essentially end up walking away as he would realize that life was long behind him. She's happy now. She has a new husband and he has a little sister. One that he'll never know, but at least Izuku knows that she's out there. From this point, Izuku would decide that for now, I guess he's just gonna have to make do with whatever he has. And so, Izuku would proceed to essentially just go to work, and at night, he would actually stay at the actual, let's just call it a Starbucks. It's not a Starbucks, but let's just call it that. He would stay there in the break room and pretty much take a nap on the couch with the pillow and blanket that, you know, his coworkers had gotten for him. He was a really nice guy and he didn't exactly treat anybody mean. Not unless you were rude to him, he was never rude to you. As much as Deku's changed and he's become serious, cool, confident, and suave, he was still the sweetheart he's always been. No matter how much Suriko wanted to beat that out of him, he just never could. He was a tough one to crack, and Suriko did respect that, although he did find it a bit annoying at times. That said, Izuku would continue working his job for the next couple of months, and eventually he would be just so bored. The same monotonous schedule every single day was getting so unbelievably tiring. So Izuku would decide that at night he was going to be doing a bit of vigilante work, seeing as if he couldn't be a hero, he wouldn't exactly mind stopping a couple villains here and there. So Izuku, under the dead of night, would go out and do a bit of hero patrolling, actually stopping a bunch of different villain attacks from happening and stopping a bunch of gang activity, drug dealings, and a bunch of random thugs here and there. Izuku doing this would actually end up garnering a lot of attention, and people would start talking about the new vigilante that's out there, not exactly knowing what to call him, but Izuku would just do his thing and never exactly leave a trace behind. That is, until an unfortunate situation would lead to Izuku having a massive confrontation with a bunch of pro heroes. Eventually, Izuku would end up spotting a massive villain altercation, and he would actually notice that the pro heroes were having an extremely hard time calming down this villain who had seemingly injected his already insanely powerful quirk with a quirk enhancement drug that's been going crazy. Yeah, that is a quirk vigilante, or no, My Hero Vigilante reference. Comment down below in the comments if you guys have actually seen. Comment down below in the comments. That's such a dumb. Who says that? Anyways, comment down below if you guys have watched the new My Hero. Comment down below if you guys have seen that new series on Crunchyroll that has to do with My Hero, the little spin-off vigilante thing. I've seen the first 3 episodes personally. I think it's pretty sick. Let me know also if you guys would even like to see like a what if, you know, he had a different quirk. I thought it'd be so cool if instead of doing Deku, I covered that, like gave him like a really OP quirk and had him train under that weird dude that likes to land on trash bags. I forgot his name. Knuckle Duster, right? Knuckle Duster. But yeah, weird questions aside, jumping back into the story, what I'm essentially trying to set up is Deku to have a really bad encounter with the heroes. Mind you, he's been doing hero work. He literally hasn't been doing anything illegal. He hasn't killed anyone, which is shocking, but he wants to become a hero, right? He's not going to just go around killing people, but he definitely does have a tendency to use excessive force because, you know, these guys are villains, you know what I mean? Like Suriko didn't train him to be a little weakling, so he beats him pretty badly. That said, eventually the heroes would have a giant villain who they're having an extremely hard time contesting with, and Deku, seeing this, would actually end up having like no choice but to step in. Deku doing this would end up making his presence public, and after defeating the villain, Deku would be seen by hundreds of people that would like take pictures of him and stuff like that. And mind you, at this current moment, Deku looks just like Rob Lucci with the curly hair, the black hair, you know, like the hat, the suit and stuff like that. So that's what Deku looks like, right? And you know, everyone's taking pictures of him, and Deku would be just accepting it all, just like in the limelight. Deku in this moment had forgotten that he wasn't exactly supposed to be doing this, and so after everything would be said and done, the police would come over towards him, and one of the officers, I was gonna say Teuchi, but no, one of the officers, Sukamachi, I don't know, one of the officers would basically come over to him and tell him that he needs to come in for questioning, telling him that even though he helped out today, he needs to come in because what he's doing is illegal at the end of the day. And then you would just hear the crowd be like, boo, boo, he's a hero, he saved you guys. You know, people were saying that, and they're like, a bunch of heroes got beat up before he ended up arriving. You know, people were like, you know, fighting for him. They're like, dude, he saved our lives, right? Because Deku came in and proceeded to use his fighting style to just absolutely obliterate this dude with finger bullets and tempest kicks. Like, it was just a wash, right? But regardless of this, Deku realizing that, you know, what was he gonna do? Like, run away? They knew what he looked like and they were gonna find him at a coffee shop regardless. So Deku ends up essentially having to go in with the police, and he would be worried, extremely worried, because if things go from, you know, things go as bad as they could possibly go, Deku was never gonna become a pro hero at this rate. But Izuku held out hope because he has faith in the pro hero system. Regardless, Deku would finally make his way to a cell, and a police officer would come into the cell as he would have a quirk which is essentially a true or false quirk, where he could tell if you're lying or if you're telling the truth. And it all really is dependent on how he asked the question. So with that being said, he would go on to ask Deku a bunch of questions, ask him if he has a quirk. Deku would say he doesn't. He would say true. And some of the pro heroes who were there to like pretty much question him, which I think a perfect hero to be there would be Endeavor. He would be like, how the hell are you telling me that this guy has no quirk? Did you see what he did? He must be lying. You know, the police officer would be like, yeah, he has to be. Like, there's no way he did that. Deku looks at him and goes, no, I'm serious. Like, I'm not lying. You know, he's just saying that with a cold, like, he's just being honest. Like, you know what I mean? He has like a monotone voice. So they're just like not believing him. And Endeavor at one point tells him, tell the truth, you know? But Deku's like, I am telling the truth. And then like the police officer's just like, he is telling the truth. How is he doing this? Like, there's no way. So they begin questioning him, and they're like, what's your name? And he's like, my name, it's Rob Lucci. He would lie about his name just in case, because he's kind of worried that at this point he might even have to break out of jail or something like that just to get out, right? And so this would pretty much lead nowhere. Deku's just getting more and more frustrated, and they would end up telling Deku that his bail is approximately this much money. Deku, not knowing Inko and not exactly having gotten Sukihiro's phone number because he doesn't exactly have one, has literally no way of getting out. He can't make one phone call. What's he gonna do? Call his colleagues at Starbucks and ask them to bail him out? They couldn't even afford to pay for that. So Deku was royally screwed. It'd be at this point that, you know, Deku would be in the cell, and a couple of days would pass, and an officer would actually come over towards him and tell him, hey kid, you've been in here for a couple of days, and to be honest, I don't think you deserve to be in here, but we're going to be transferring you to actual prison. And Deku would be like, what? You're going to take me to prison for saving a bunch of people? The man would say, like I said, I'm on your side, but the law is the law. You perform those actions without a pro hero license, and in this day and age, vigilantes are not exactly a good thing. That said, Deku would slam his hand on the bars as they would bend, and the officer would get scared as he would end up saying, hey, one more of those and I'm calling reinforcements. Deku, you know, would be extremely enraged, and he would just be like, all right, well, I guess I gotta break out then. So Izuku would essentially bide his time, realizing that he's literally never gonna be able to become a pro hero because of the fact that he wanted to help. Like, that is so unbelievably stupid to Deku. But it's just the situation that he got himself into, and now he kind of has to lay with the consequences of his actions. That said, Deku would bide his time, and as the time would get closer and closer, Deku would actually have that same guard go to a cell as he would say, all right, well, someone paid your bond. It'd be at this point that Deku would question who in the world could have paid his bond, when suddenly Deku would be face to face with a man in a suit. Hold on, let me readjust my microphone because my neck is hurting in the recording position that I'm in right now. So yeah, no, Deku would pretty much end up here. Actually, I need to test. All right, back from testing. I just had to make sure that it sounded good and it didn't exactly sound like butt cheeks. So now that I tested that and it sounds all good, we can begin back with the story. Obviously, this man would be the broker that works for One For All, and One For All, having seen the video and knowing what happened with this guy who clearly has a lot of upside in terms of potential and was acting as a vigilante trying to do the good for the people, would decide that if he has any opportunity to get this guy to turn to his side, it was here and now. And so, All For One would essentially have ended up deciding to bail Izuku out and meet him face to face. After this would end up taking place, Deku would have a conversation with the broker who would actually end up informing him that he has noticed his talents. And by saying he doesn't actually mean himself, but the man he works for. He would go on to give him a card saying that this is his name and yada yada yada. And Izuku, after having a conversation with this man, would essentially get to the point that his boss wants to meet him. Izuku, after hearing this, would think that he definitely wants to give his thanks to this guy and hear out whatever offer he wants to give him. So, Izuku and this man would walk away and they'd be driven to a separate location where suddenly a purple warp gate would appear in the car. As Deku turns around to see this, he'd be wondering who the heck that is, when suddenly he'd be teleported to a different location. Izuku, after sensing that, would feel everything around him, as his eyes would lock onto a shadowy figure in the distance sitting on a weird looking throne. Izuku, walking closer, would notice that it's a man with a Darth Vader looking mask on him, as he would ask him if he's the man who ended up paying for his bail. All For One at this point would say it was him, going on to explain to him that he thought his act was heroic, but the public didn't exactly seem to see it that way. He would go on to explain that for years, Hero Society has been going on a downward spiral, and even heroes aren't looked at as that nowadays. Nowadays, even vigilantes who are trying to do good for this world, or people who are trying to do them with unorthodox methods, are seen as villains. He would go on to introduce himself as All For One and tell him that he could use him if the heroes don't, going on to explain that he wishes to reform Hero Society. He wishes to restore what was once lost, via any means necessary. Deku, hearing this, would think to himself that that's not exactly something in the cards, that it seems to him like he wants him to continue playing vigilante, but he can't exactly do that. As grateful as he is to the man for saving his life, he would tell him that as it stands, he wants to become a hero, and as a thank you, he'll do him a favor some other time, but for now, he has to go. He's gonna decline respectfully. All For One at this point would nod as he would say, "Very well, thank you for your time," as we would essentially have Deku be teleported back out to the normal world, where Deku would make his way to his Starbucks job the next day, and he would go on to pretty much inform them about the crazy things that went down. They would all be stunned, saying, "Yeah, we heard about it on the news." And Deku would say, "I figured." As from here, he would essentially make his way towards his phone, and he would end up making or trying to register for UA for the entrance exams. But one thing would be made very apparent, that he wasn't allowed to take the test because of what had ended up going down with him and the heroes and the vigilante stuff on his record. UA just wasn't going to be accepting somebody like him. And so Izuku would smash his phone after receiving that notification and think, "I've dedicated every single waking moment of my life. I've made so many sacrifices, and this is how they repay me? They repay me by spitting in my face after I save hundreds of lives, after I sacrifice my childhood for strength." Damn it all, Deku would think, as it'd be at this point that Deku would get a notification from All For One, as it would say, "I'm here if you ever change your mind." And Deku, after receiving that, would think, "I'll take you up on that offer." He would send the message to All For One, and after this would happen, All For One would have a gigantic smile on his face as he would think, "Perfect." It'd be at this point that All For One and Izuku would meet once more, and all that pretty much goes down during this meeting is All For One essentially explaining to Izuku that his plan essentially resolves around making a huge bang to show everybody that they mean business. He would go on to explain to Izuku that the plan is to kill All Might, and Izuku, hearing that, would almost feel like time had stopped completely. He would say, "You want to kill All Might? He's the symbol of peace, though. He's the only thing that stands between villain activity skyrocketing." From this point, All For One would go on to explain that it's a necessary sacrifice for Hero Society to be reformed and for people to understand. They have to know that they mean business. And so Izuku, hearing this, would say that he doesn't want to even take part of that. But It'd be at this point that All For One would say that Hero Society has already rejected him, and unless he does something about it, there are going to be a bunch of more people like him who are going to continue to be rejected unless All Might is made an example of. He would go on to explain to Izuku that he doesn't even need him to kill All Might, just to help. And All For One from this point would proceed to, manipulate Izuku, sweet talk him a little bit, and tell him that he can compensate him handsomely. Not only could he give him money and fame and wealth, but he could also give him a quirk. Deku, hearing that, would raise an eyebrow as he would say, "There's no way that you could give me a quirk. That's not how they work." As All For One would go on to explain that is how they work. At least, that's how he can make things work. Izuku, after hearing that, would be absolutely stunned, as All For One would go on to explain to Izuku that he has the power to give him a quirk, and he actually thinks he has one that's perfect for him. As he would tell Izuku to get closer, and as Izuku would do so, a red energy would begin pouring out of All For One as he would place his hand on Izuku's head, and Izuku would feel his body begin to transform. His eyes change color, his skin would begin to get harder, he would feel fur begin to grow from his body, claws would appear on him, his abs would begin to grow, and even a tail would sprout from his back. Deku, after feeling this, would feel the massive change as he was given the ability to transform into a leopard. Deku, seeing this, would feel the newfound strength that's coursing through his veins as the animalistic instincts would want him to attack All For One, but Izuku would snap back into reality as All For One would say, "Do we have a deal?" And Izuku, from this point, after feeling the strength that he was granted from this, would nod, saying, "Sure, I'm game." And so, we'd pretty much end up getting Deku actually making his way to UA. And what's pretty interesting is that Deku would actually be recommended via One For All and hero contacts that he has. Deku would be given a fake alias, a fake name, a fake social security number, and a fake quirk name that would essentially be Panther mode. Wait, is it a panther? What he transforms into? I don't know. Cat mode or whatever. Leopard mode, right? Leopard mode. That said, Deku would make his way into UA and he ends up passing the recommendation exam, and Deku obviously can't go looking how he did when he was on the news. So Deku would have a complete makeover to actually looking a lot more similar to what he looked like, before, his old look of Izuku Midoriya. Right? And so once Izuku would be done with all of these things and get ready for the mission, we would essentially have Deku make his way to class as the first day of school would come around. When Izuku would walk inside, Deku would be greeted to the side of Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida arguing, as Deku, stunned at the fact that Bakugo was there, would feel weird, not knowing whether he feels anger or pity at the fact that Bakugo hasn't changed in all this time. But Deku would make his way towards the back of the bus, or not bus, but seat, as room, as Deku actually wouldn't even have an encounter with Uraraka in this timeline because he never went to the entrance exam, and Uraraka survives because either the heroes save her or they'd simply turn off the robot before he can crush and kill her. That said, what pretty much ends up taking place is Aizawa introduces himself, they take the quirk apprehension test, and Izuku, not trying to, show off all his cards, would play it safe, acting weak, not showing off all the abilities that he has, and only using his leopard quirk to the only base abilities, not using his Rokushiki techniques or any of that. Even though if he did use that, he would have easily used Shave to essentially just blow everything out of the water, and other abilities that would have definitely helped him with whatever events and tests were being held. I don't know why I'm stuttering so much. It's just low-key, once I got to this point of the story, I'm kind of having writer's block in the sense of I don't know what to happen next, Actually, no, never mind. I figured it out. Okay. So once they go back to school the very next day, we're essentially going to be having the heroes versus villains event. And during this event, just like in the original, Deku's actually going to be paired up and matched against Bakugo and Ida. Events are not really going to be changing right here, but one thing is, and that's going to be the beatdown of Katsuki Bakugo. The second that the battle would begin, even without Bakugo having a prejudice towards Deku, I could still see him being the cocky character that we all know and love, being a lot more powerful than the one that we get in the original, just due to the fact that he is 18 and has had a lot more time to work on his quirk. That would also apply to Ida, as well as Uraraka, but more for Deku. The second that the battle would begin, Bakugo would go flying downstairs, rushing towards Deku, and throw a big right punch explosion at him. Deku easily dodging out of the way by using paper art to move like paper essentially, or like slime, would slither out of the way as he would grab onto Bakugo's arm and slam him on the ground with monstrous strength, not even having activated his leopard mode yet. Bakugo would cough out would like literally puke after having that happen, and ricochet off the ground as he would look up towards Deku and throw an explosion, creating a smoke screen which would create a barrier between them. Bakugo at this point, shooting explosions in the hallway, would expect for this to have absolutely decimated Deku, who would have taken the brunt force of that. But Deku would have ended up transforming into his panther state and using Iron Body at the same time. His clothes would be torn to shatters, to shreds, but Deku was standing there without a single scratch, and as Bakugo was sitting there mesmerized, stunned by how in the world that could have happened, Deku would unleash years of pent-up anger at the fact that no one considered him, worthy of becoming a hero on Bakugo, as he would go on to land a Tempest Kick. Not a Tempest Kick, but he would speed blitz in front of Bakugo and gut punch him, causing Bakugo to be sent crashing through 3 walls and ultimately be sent crashing out of the building as he would fall unconscious and Bakugo would be stunned by the speed and the strength. All Might in that moment would think that he must have moved even faster than he was in his prime, and it'd be at this point that Izuku would smirk smiling, beginning to break through the next couple of floors and arriving right in front of Ida. He would essentially speed blitz him, grabbing Ida by the helmet and smashing him into the ground as he would grab onto the bomb, and All Might would say, "Hero team wins!" The students, however, after seeing Izuku's performance, would say that he acted more like a villain, but as soon as Izuku walked into the room, their whole attitudes changed. And so now we jump into the actual USJ event, where in this timeline, Izuku is going to be a mole for the villains. So everything that could go wrong for the hero side of things would go wrong. That means that because Izuku's not on the hero side defending Aizawa ends up dying. The normal 100% kills Aizawa, if not Shigaraki, who ends up decaying him. Also, Tsuyu never ends up jumping in, so I don't think she would die. You know what's crazy? Bakugo might literally die in this moment because he tries to interfere with the fight. But, I don't want to kill him just yet, so I'm going to say that he doesn't die, just so that Deku might get the satisfaction of doing that later. Actually, nah, Bakugo's gonna die, Loki. No, wait, I don't know. Bakugo's gonna live, Todoroki and them, they're gonna come in, they're gonna try to fight Shigaraki, but ultimately it doesn't work. Deku's gonna pretend that, he's struggling to get out of the water section or whatever. And finally, when All Might would arrive, Deku would simply think, showtime. And at this point, Deku would essentially watch as the Nomu and All Might would go at it. Deku, seeing that All Might was moving so sluggishly and slowly, would think to himself that this isn't the All Might that he remembers, as he would blitz in the way and just destroy the Nomu, sending a punch that would actually send it flying out of the area, as Deku, turning towards All Might, would smirk, and All Might would say, young, not Midoriya, but whatever his alias is that he's using, as he would go on to thank Deku for his help, as Izuku would say, "I wouldn't exactly thank me yet." And at this point, you would essentially see Deku's claws stabbed into All Might's weak spot that he would have seen that the Nomu would have created. Izuku, after having done that, would get to eye level with All Might, as he would tell him that it's not personal, it's just business. As All Might would say, "Why?" And Izuku would say, "The hero side rejected me, the villain side, they accepted me." All for One sends his regards. He would whisper into the skeleton form of All Might's ear, as All Might, being stunned by the revelation that this was all planned by All for One, would die slowly. The rest of the heroes would arrive, but Izuku, seeing them, not caring about them at all, would simply disappear alongside Shigaraki and everybody else, and everyone would be stunned. After this would take place, we would essentially get a scene of Shigaraki gloating, "We killed him, we killed All Might, we killed All Might," like he's just like doing the absolute most, and Deku just gets pissed. He's like, "We didn't kill All Might, I did." And he just walks off, and Shigaraki's like, "Don't forget who's the leader, who's in control." and Izuku would proceed to use his paw and like grab at Shigaraki as he would say, "And don't forget who has the ability to kill you at a moment's notice." As he would go on to say, "Place that fifth finger on my hand and I'll pop your head like a balloon," as we would essentially get a moment of tenseness between Shigaraki and Izuku. And after this would happen, I'm kind of left at a loss, because here's the way that I could see the story going. Deku continues being a villain and ultimately the villain side wins, or Deku not agreeing with All For One's plans of world domination and strong eat the weak mentality, which is something that Deku would not like, considering that he was the weak, would either try to stand up to All For One and essentially kill him. And honestly, I could see that happening. So we would pretty much end up getting Deku turning into like the Lord of the Underworld and killing anyone in the League of Villains that didn't agree with him, forming a new CP0 agency that was essentially in charge of dethroning the normal hero society that was established. Deku would end up actually forming a new world that would actually be better and worse all at the same time. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be wrapping up What If Deku was Rob Lucci's reincarnation. Now, I know that the ending of the story was a little bit weak compared to the beginning section, specifically the first 50 minutes, but honestly, most of the flames that I had of wanting to write the story happened towards the beginning, right? Towards the end, I pretty much ended up building a character that with these abilities that he has is just able to absolutely stomp everyone. Now, obviously, going down a different path, he would have ended up fighting Overhaul and All For One and all those characters and stuff like that. And, maybe I would have gone down that path if it was earlier in the nighttime, but it's not. It's getting very late and your boy kind of wants to go to sleep. So in case you guys want a bonus part where the story ends up going down a different route and maybe he ends up going back to becoming hero and regrets what he had ended up doing, then smash the like button, because the like goal for this video will be 2,000 likes, just because I don't really want to do it. But if y'all hit 2K, then hey, I'm not going to pass up that opportunity. That said, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.